Welcome to The Constructive Thinking, a podcast by the Progressive Contractors Association of Canada. My name is Paul DeYoung, CEO of PCDA. Today we're bringing back Lindsay Langill, talking more about topics related to apprenticeship, credentialing, and skills training. We covered in the last podcast a number of critical elements, including dual training, parity of esteem, and the nature of other organizations or countries with their credentialing system. There's more for us to talk about, and so I brought Lindsay back to have more conversation on this topic. Welcome back, Lindsay.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate you having me on.
Listen, let's talk about something that we've kind of alluded to. And again, this draws on the German experience and perhaps other jurisdictions, which is the concept of dual education. I know that you know about this, but for our audience, I'll briefly describe it as I understand it, which is that we used to have this in Canada with our vocational schools, but we, for some reason, dismantled the bulk of them. But in Germany, and I believe in the UK, there is a system in place where students, while in high school, will begin to receive trades training while they're earning their high school diploma. That's a very simple description of it, but I want to hand it over to you, Lindsay, to talk about the benefits, and maybe there's some faults with that system. And let's talk about dual education in the high school system.
Yeah, well, thanks, Paul. Certainly that's something that I've spent a lot of time on, a lot of years on, and probably some of your listeners may have even read my doctoral dissertation that spoke about the youth training in trades, as we, as you call it in Alberta and in British Columbia. It's under a similar name, but the focus of that was to bring back into the high school system where kids in grade 11 and 12 could start taking trades programs that both counted towards the graduation that they would receive from high school and also give them their first year credit in the trade of their choice. And I was one of the people that started that in 2005 in British Columbia, and it still is doing well here today within our school systems. And, one of the things that we noticed back at that time was so many of the great shop programs within the high schools were closing down, and it was for a couple of reasons. They were expensive courses to run and budgets were tight. Second, with the influx of students to the school, they needed more, to acquire more space, and shops were big, so if they weren't filling up or were sitting empty for a couple of blocks of the day, why not chop those up and put a classroom in there? So a bunch of reasons for that. But what the Youth Training and Trades program was able to do, and my doctoral work showed this, is it increased the graduation rates by up to 2 to 3%. So kids that were leaving school, not graduating because it just didn't appeal to them, they were going. So now this program kept them in school. It improved the graduation. Secondly, these kids knew what they wanted to do once they got into the trade, and then they were ahead of the game so that they already had their first level completed, so that now when they went to work for an employer, the employer didn't have to release them from work to go back to school for the whole piece. They'd already had that one piece done. So it really improved the system. And it is running in most provinces across Canada now. So that was our attempt to, kind of fashion what has happened in some of the other countries.
Well, that's fantastic. And I hope that continues to spread. One particular question I want to ask you, again, based on the German experience, is that if I understood it correctly, they actually commenced the dual education program, I think already in grade 9, or what they call grade 9, so that the student will actually have a high school diploma and a trade certificate in their pocket. Is that actually kind of feasible? I mean, it may not even work in Canada, but there are other reasons to think that might not be doable from a safety reason, like a grade 9 student who doesn't have a great deal of focused attention. getting on tools, getting into a vibrant job site, isn't it advisable to start trades education that early? Part of the reason I asked that is that here in Alberta, I don't think there's any other jurisdictions that do this, although maybe in BC, individuals can now self-register for an apprenticeship. They no longer have to have a company indenture them or a union indenture them. They can indenture themselves. And that simultaneously is an attractive idea that it gives them an easier path, but it's also for some contractors a little scary because they haven't really yet shown an aptitude for a trade that they can determine as verifiable. And there's questions around a grade 9er or a grade 10er really having the mindset, the clarity of mind to be safe on a job. What do you think about earlier commencement and completion of trades training in high schools?
Yeah, well, if I was designing the complete system, I would be starting the trades and technical education as far back as grade 1. I would be doing it through a literacy program where they had, grade 1s and 2s and 3s. They had, books on, this is a trade and let's just say plumbing, or this person does this and here's the tools that they work. So it becomes part of their literacy program. And, and I get it. We're battling an uphill battle in the sense that we're trying to teach kids how to read and, formulate sentences at a young age. But we're fighting against, the blue screen that's telling them everything through that. And that's a whole lot, that's a little better for it. So I would start it there. But again, it comes down to designing the system so that you are starting to instill a love or a passion for something that they don't know. And I always say this, that you only know what you know. And, a lot of kids, they don't have the exploration side of life because of, maybe their circumstances. So again, that becomes part of what the schooling system is to open these doors of the world for them to explore. So again, if we're not bringing that sort of that trades or technical side into the inside of that building and, weaving it into the curriculum, they're not getting that. But to speak directly to your program, grade 9 and 10, fantastic years to start them doing things. And, kids love to be active. And, I think back to when I was in junior high and we were taking metal work and, we were 13, 14 years old. We were welding and we were, machining things on lathes. And I think of that instructor, that teacher of the time, and he had trained under a rigorous apprenticeship system and became a journey person in England in the Rolls-Royce factory. Well, that program of bringing a person through an apprenticeship and becoming a journey person and over there then became a master journey person, this person really understood what it was like to, take people and train them carefully. So again, I think of what we did as young kids, and we were all, instructed safely and projects that we could manage based on our physicalness. I think that, if we were designing something for grade 9, 10, we have a program in our schools out here in November. It's called Take Your Kid to Work Day. And, people do that. But again, if you took them on even field trips to different industry sites at that level and got their eyes open so that then they could see this person is responsible for this area and this person is an IT techie that, has to know about trades, but is managing all the cobots or the robotic welding or the automated systems in, beverage factories. It just goes on. So our world has changed because of the technology, but you can't separate the understanding of trades, technology, and even the management side or the engineering that goes above that. So again, more that we can do to bring those and mesh all those together without the separation is exactly what we need, and it certainly will help us break down barriers around that. So those are just some of the things that I think that could be done. And I'll give you one more comment before I kick it back to you. One of the things I found when I was dean at Thompson Rivers University of Trades and Technology was that we started to put on what were called trades, whereby people would come in and do it. And then I got thinking one day, why don't we put together a program where we have 5 trades over the course of a semester, an academic semester, and we spend 3 weeks in each one. And very little paperwork, because that's why a lot of people leave high school, is it's always paper, paper, paper. These people want hands-on. So we put together the first program, and it had carpentry, and it had plumbing, and it had electrical, and I can't remember the last 2 off the top of my head. And then these young adults would come in, and before they even started in this, we called it try a trade. Before they even started, I would say to them, what is it that you want to be in the trades? And they would say, I want to be a heavy duty mechanic, or I want to be an electrician, or I want to be this. At the end of the try a trade, when I asked them that same question,
is to kind of siloize or segmentize the trades and kind of create these walls around them, when in fact, there are many trades that have adjacent skill sets that are easily either learned or even done by a person who has a similar trade. For example, a boilermaker doing welding work, or a fabricator doing welding work, whatever the case may be. Talk to me a bit about what you see as opportunities with multi-skilling in terms of productivity, increasing career trajectories for people in the trades, broadening horizons.
Yeah, again, I'll go back to this, is that, we're facing an uphill battle in Canada around having enough qualified tradespeople that can actually do the work. So we need to, focus on the good people that we have and keep them employed. That's a key thing. Yeah. So, it's really interesting, because one of the trades that, that I work with out here in British Columbia is it's a bit of an unknown trade, in the sense that they're called bridge worker pile drivers. And they're the ones that do all the building on the marine aspect of civil construction. Right. And it's really interesting that if you look at their training system, there's 3 levels of technical training, which is the going to school piece. For years and years, the first 2 levels of that technical training were identical to carpentry level 1 and 2. So then really what you're saying is that you've taken the carpentry trade, cut it in half, but that half was important for this group to be trained as a trades worker, but the other half would go on. Then the 3rd level was completely, around the marine side, which is, the rigging and working on cranes and managing vibro hammers and, things like that. Now that industry has changed so much, and I actually did a podcast last year on this, the changing in that industry, where they're adding so much now into the steel side of it. Well, that group doesn't need a full-blown iron worker. They don't need a full-blown boilermaker. They don't need a full-blown fabricator, but they need someone with the understanding and the experience and the welding tickets to manage the steel component, because it's very monolithical in many ways. It doesn't, expand out into, broad bases. So, you don't need a full-blown welder on that, but you need, welder with CWB tickets, etc. So what we're seeing is that as industry changes, and the ways that we do work and the engineering aspect of that, the trades have to adapt to that work, so that the skills of these people can no longer just kind of focus between walls and barriers, but they have to grow as well. And that means that we encroach on other trades. So a couple of things on that. Do you add some modules to that, or do you say, let's get this person dual ticketed in similar trades? And, apprenticeship and scaffolding and carpentry are very useful. Scaffolding and insulator is another one that's very useful, because they're there at the same time doing the same job. Right. And quite honestly, when we're short of people and we have good people, good quality people, we should be able to certify them in more than one area so that they can stay with the project longer. Because one of the bigger costs to these industrial projects is the orientation piece of it at the front end, which is 3 days or 4 or 5 days in some cases, that the employer has to bear the cost of this person to come in and be orientated, where if we could carry that same person through the length of that project, it has huge savings for everyone. Plus, the person that's actually doing the work continues to, cash a paycheck and has their benefits and is learning more skills because of the vastness of that project.
Fascinating. I want to switch gears again. We began the first segment of our podcast talking about period of steam and trying to undo the stigmas that are attached to skilled trades. You noted just a moment ago that we just don't have enough workers, and that one technique is to, with multi-skilling and dual ticketing to get better results from the workers we already have in our backyard. We are mindful, of course, that there are what we call underutilized groups that should be lifted up. We've talked extensively, and I think very well, about youth in elementary and high schools. Let's talk a little bit about women in the trades and Indigenous people in the trades, and let's start with women. These are both very big categories, so we'll have to kind of harness our conversation. But what are some of the key barriers to women in the trades, and do you have any knowledge or examples of where we're turning a corner with welcoming women to the construction trades?
Again, this is my experience, and certainly a couple of the larger companies that I've worked for and still work for out here, around their people side. I'm finding that the guys, as I'll call them, on the site, they're fine with the women coming on to the trade site. So I think we've moved beyond, that person shouldn't be here type of thing because we moved beyond that. I think the bigger service that we should be offering to, if we want to talk about women in the trade specifically, is give them that opportunity that I was talking about earlier of trying various trades to see how they would work for them. Because everybody's life is different, their lifestyles are different, their demands on their time are different. And their passion is different because of the past skills that they may or may not have. So again, we only know what we know, as I said before. So let's give them that open carte blanche approach to, why don't you try these different trades and see how that works? Very interesting. I ran into a lady at a conference in Chicago last year, and I was just fascinated talking to her because she had trained as a hydraulics mechanic, and then she opened up her own business in renting out lift trucks and elevated work platforms, and just took over the market in this because it was something that she not only loved, but she understood, and she had great communication skills and the ability to work with people. So again, there's a woman who found a niche that she just absolutely loved and went after. So I think, again, that avenue of just putting different options in front of people.
Yeah.
Again, when I was at Thompson Rivers University, and I was talking in the earlier podcast about the try-a-trade and how I put 5 in place to begin with, it became so popular. And I could see the value of this as a screening tool for people coming in, that I actually built out 15 different trades, and I put them into 3 different sections. So we put 5 try-trades into a construction plot, we put 5 try-trades into an industrial plot, and we put 5 different trades into the mechanical try-trades. So those were the mechanic work, heavy-duty mechanic, commercial transport, automotive mechanics, small engine, stuff like that. Because again, I wanted to make sure that if people were going into those distinct areas, and sometimes they're able to figure out what they like, that would take the trades that were kind of wrapped up under that umbrella, and do that. So again, we wrote the curriculum for that. It's funny, the curriculum is still online as free for anybody to grab out there that wants to teach.
Yeah.
And it worked really, really well.
Well, that again, fascinating. My last question for you before we wrap things up is on the Indigenous involvement in our industry. As long as I've been around, which is closing in on 30, 35 years in this construction sector, the industry writ large has been trying to increase involvement with Indigenous peoples, and it hasn't always been very successful. And I would suppose that you might offer that the triad-trade model is also worthy of being applied in the Indigenous context. And so maybe speak about that, but also, are there other issues that need to be recognized and identified as we talk to Indigenous peoples about opportunities in the trades?
Yeah, this is an interesting, conversation. One that I've actually had a lot of experience in. Quite a few years ago, we had an association that was put together here in British Columbia called the BC Aboriginal Mine Training Association, which I was asked to be a founding director on and assist in that training. And really what it was for, it was to work with the First Nations people across the province of British Columbia with a specific target of getting them into the mining industry and, working and running heavy haul trucks or being mechanics and, heavy equipment operators and things like that. So I had a specific focus. But what I learned from that is that every First Nation territory you had to approach in a different manner, because there's differences in their culture. There's differences in the education system that they are currently going through or failed in. There's so many things. So first thing is you need to understand the area or that nation. That's number one. The second is that if you're going to go in and train in our traditional ways of sit down, here's a book, here's a piece of paper, right here, do this, they're out the door before you've even got the paper out of your briefcase. So that traditional way does not work. Again, from experience, when I was setting up some of these programs at Thompson Rivers University, I would try to find a champion that was from the First Nations communities, and they had a different approach to working with their people because they had gone through some hard experiences in their life. They had overcome so many things that would, push them back, and yet they became a Red Seal welder or a Red Seal something. So when you were able to find that person and help them to, set them up as that trainer, the success was a whole lot better. The other piece too is that, and I'll use this as an example, we were, again, I was at university, one of the nations came to us, and they were about an hour and a half's drive away, and they said, we have these students that would like to be carpenters and, come up in the carpenter. But, they don't have driver's licenses and some of these things. So it's difficult to get them over to the university for the training. And I said, whoever said that you have to come to a university to train? Does it make sense for 16 people to come all this way? It makes more sense if I was to take my instructor and have that one person drive the other way. And what we found out is that they had a piece of property and they wanted to, they had some federal funding to build some houses. So what we did is we had that instructor go over there, and they actually, with these students, they got indentured as apprentices to the band, and they built the house under the tutelage of the instructor. And many of those carried on and became Red Seal carpenters. It was amazing. In fact, I still in touch with that chief and some of that. So again, when we talk about Indigenous, what I'm saying is, let's not just take our traditional way of training as sort of the cookie cutter approach and slap it down and say, if you don't fit into these boxes, it isn't going to happen. We need to adjust that way. And one other thing I'll just say on this too, and I haven't done this, but it was certainly something I've talked about at different conferences, is that, for instance, if we come in and we're teaching level 1 carpentry to an Indigenous group, we should be looking at our competency statements that we need to teach to. So it might be on use of tools, that you have to use certain hand tools, et cetera, et cetera. Why is it then that we always start and say, well, we're going to make a sawhorse? That is just a common thing that all first level carpentry students make, because it's the easy thing to do. You have a bunch of 2x4s, and that's what the instructor knows, so you do that. And it's useful for holding things up. I'm not disputing any of that. But why wouldn't we say, if we're going to use these tools and teach them how to use mallets and hammers and chisels and some of those things, that we wouldn't create something that was aboriginal? So, maybe, carve this, or we do something else, because now they feel that within inside them that there's that connection, and it really helps with reconciliation and all the other aspects that we're supposed to be weaving into, the education system. So again, those are change elements that don't come easy. I just wrote a paper just recently on why instructors teach the way they do, and it is based on my interviews of many instructors, and it just comes down to, well, that was the way I was taught, right? When I went through my Bachelor of Education program, or that's how I was taught by my instructors. So they don't question it; they just do the way that they have, rather than look in the mirror and say, is there a better way that I can actually be delivering this knowledge and these skills and these attitudes? And that's what it is all about. So yeah, we've got lots of changes that we could invoke into the system if we're not afraid to just ask why.
Well, I think that is a great way to wrap up the podcast. Why shouldn't we ask why? Why shouldn't we revisit some of the approaches we've taken and innovate and progress forward in new ways? So, Lindsay, you've shared with us over the past 2 segments your wisdom, your experiences, your knowledge, and I deeply thank you for doing that, taking the time with us. We appreciate it, and thanks very much, and all the best to you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, and appreciate it.